A single dad CEO froze the moment he saw the waitress's ring, and his 6-year-old daughter saw everything. She was sitting across from him at the breakfast table, drawing hearts on a paper placemat with a red crayon, humming to herself, safe in the kind of moment children don't know is precious until they're grown. Then her father's coffee cup slipped from his hand. The crash made her jump. Hot liquid sprayed across the table. The waitress stumbled backward, tray clattering to the floor, and her father just sat there like someone had reached into his chest and stopped his heart. The little girl didn't understand what was happening, but she understood her father's face. She'd seen him run board meetings. She'd seen him fire executives without blinking. She'd seen him handle crisis after crisis with that same calm, controlled expression. But right now, he looked like he was breaking. The waitress was apologizing, trying to clean up the spill, and her father was staring at the woman's hand like he was seeing a ghost. At a ring, a thin gold band with a small green stone. Before the little girl could ask what was wrong, the diner owner appeared, loud, angry. The kind of man who made the air feel smaller when he entered a room. He yelled at the waitress in front of everyone, called her careless, told her he was docking her pay, said if she couldn't handle basic service, maybe she should work somewhere else. The little girl watched her father's jaw tighten, watched his hands curl into fists under the table. But he didn't move, didn't stand up, didn't say a word. The waitress finished cleaning in silence. Her hands were shaking. When she walked past their table, she looked at the little girl's father one more time. She said something so quiet, the little girl almost didn't hear it. "She told me you'd keep your promise." Then she was gone. The little girl tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy, why is that man so mean?" Her father didn't answer. He was staring at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. And in that moment, the little girl realized something that terrified her. Her father was scared. Not angry, not confused, scared. She didn't know that 17 years ago, her father had been a boy with nothing, sleeping in his car, washing dishes for $9 an hour, invisible to everyone except one person. A woman who gave him a ring and made him promise, "When you're not invisible anymore, find me." He'd promised. He'd said, "I'll marry you." But that woman died, and her father spent 17 years building an empire on top of her grave, carrying her ring like a stone in his pocket, trying to become someone worthy of a promise he could never keep. Until today, when a waitress wearing that same ring looked at him like she knew exactly who he used to be. If you believe that the promises we make to the people we've lost are the ones that shape who we become, stay with this story. Because what you're about to hear will break your heart and put it back together in a way you won't forget. Before we begin, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments. Have you ever carried something from your past that you couldn't let go of, even when it hurt? Now, let me tell you the story of a man who thought he'd buried his past, until it walked into a diner wearing the ring he'd spent 17 years trying to forget. But to understand why a billionaire CEO sat frozen in that booth, why his daughter had to watch him crumble, we need to go back to the beginning. To the life Jonathan Pryce built after the woman he loved died in his arms, and to the ring that's been waiting in his desk drawer ever since. Jonathan Pryce's alarm went off at 5:30, but he was already awake. He'd been staring at the ceiling for 20 minutes, watching the shadows shift as Austin's downtown towers caught the first edge of sunrise. He showered in silence, dressed in the dark. By 6:15, his car was pulling out of the parking garage beneath his building, heading east toward the suburbs. Emma's mother lived in a ranch-style house with a tire swing in the front yard. Jonathan parked at the curb and waited. He didn't go to the door anymore. That agreement had been settled 2 years ago, after the divorce, after Catherine made it clear she wanted boundaries. The front door opened. Emma came running down the driveway in her school uniform, backpack bouncing, curls flying loose from the braids Catherine had tried to tame. She yanked open the passenger door and climbed in. "Daddy, why do people get sick?" No good morning. No hello. Just the question she'd been holding since she woke up. Jonathan pulled away from the curb. "Lots of reasons," he said. "Sometimes cells stop working right. Sometimes bacteria or viruses get in. Can you fix it?" "I'm trying." Emma buckled her seatbelt. She pulled a worn copy of Charlotte's Web from her backpack and opened it to a dog-eared page. "Miss Andrea says some things can't be fixed. She says sometimes people just die." Jonathan's hands tightened on the wheel. "Miss Andrea's right. But you're still trying?" "Yeah, kiddo. I'm still trying." They drove the rest of the way in comfortable quiet. Emma read. Jonathan watched the road and thought about things he couldn't fix. Jefferson Elementary sat at the end of a tree-lined street, low brick buildings with bright murals painted by parent volunteers. Jonathan pulled into the drop-off lane. Emma stuffed her book back into her bag and leaned over to hug him. "Love you, Daddy." "Love you, too." She was out the door and running toward the playground before he could say anything else. He watched her backpack disappear into a crowd of other 6-year-olds, all of them laughing and shouting and alive. Jonathan drove to Vertex. The building didn't look like a pharmaceutical company. It looked like a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and industrial steel, windows that stretched 2 stories high. Jonathan had chosen it on purpose. He hated the glass tower sterility of corporate campuses, hated the marble lobbies and the executive parking spaces, and the carefully curated art that said, "We're important," without saying anything true. His office was on the 3rd floor. No nameplate, no assistant stationed outside. Just a door that opened into a room with a desk, a wall of bookshelves, and windows that overlooked the street. He had 15 minutes before the leadership meeting. He used 10 of them to review the agenda. Used the last 5 to open his desk drawer. The ring sat in a small wooden box he'd bought at a craft fair in San Marcos 9 years ago. Thin gold band. Small jade stone. He didn't touch it. He never touched it. He just looked. 17 years. Longer than some marriages. Longer than most promises. He closed the drawer. The conference room was full by the time he arrived. 12 people around a table, laptops open, coffee going cold in ceramic mugs. His VP of Research and Development stood at the front, presenting quarterly projections on a screen. Jonathan sat at the head of the table and listened. Nodded when the numbers made sense. Stopped nodding when they didn't. "The LK7 trial," he said, cutting through the presentation. "You're proposing we extend to Phase 3. The VP hesitated. "Yes, the preliminary data looks promising." "Promising for revenue? Or promising for patients?" Silence. Jonathan leaned forward. "The endpoint metrics show moderate improvement in symptom management. Not remission. Not cure. You're asking me to invest another $40 million in a drug that makes people slightly more comfortable while they die." "It's still an improvement," someone said from the far end of the table. "Then, price it like an improvement. Don't price it like a miracle." Jonathan closed the folder in front of him. "Kill the trial. Reallocate the budget to the GBM project." The VP's face went tight. "That's a 3-year timeline with no guaranteed ROI. I don't care about ROI. I care about whether it works." No one argued. They never did. Jonathan's team had learned years ago that his decisions weren't up for debate. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. People filed out in silence, avoiding eye contact. Jonathan stayed in his seat, staring at the empty projection screen. His assistant appeared in the doorway. Young guy, fresh out of UT Austin's business school, still eager enough to think he could anticipate Jonathan's needs. "You have a breakfast meeting tomorrow," he said. "Morton's Diner, 8 a.m., near Jefferson Elementary." Jonathan looked up. "I don't remember scheduling that." "You didn't. I did." The assistant smiled nervously. "You always pick Emma up early on Fridays for her piano lesson. I thought you might want something close by." Jonathan almost said no, almost told him to cancel it. But the assistant looked so hopeful, so sure he'd done something helpful, that Jonathan just nodded. "Fine. Send me the details." The assistant left. The office went quiet again. Jonathan sat there for another 10 minutes, thinking about the ring in his desk drawer, thinking about the question Emma had asked in the car. Can you fix it? He didn't know. He'd been trying for 17 years, built a company from nothing, funded research the system ignored, hired brilliant people and paid them well, and gave them the resources to do work that mattered. But he still couldn't fix the thing that broke him. He still couldn't bring her back. That night, after he'd dropped Emma at Catherine's house and driven home to his empty apartment, Jonathan sat in his office and opened the drawer again. The ring caught the lamplight, gold and green. A promise he'd made when he had nothing. A promise he'd kept in every way, except the one that mattered. "When I'm not invisible anymore, I'll marry you." He'd said it, meant it, believed it. And then she died, and the promise became a ghost he carried in a wooden box. Jonathan closed the drawer, turned off the light, went to bed. Tomorrow he'd take Emma to breakfast at some diner near her school. Tomorrow he'd go through the motions of being the man he'd built himself into. Tomorrow the past would stay buried, the way it had for 17 years. He had no idea that tomorrow everything would detonate. Morton's Diner sat 2 blocks from Jefferson Elementary, squeezed between a dry cleaner and Ozzed bookstore. The sign out front had been there since the 80s, blue neon letters with half the bulbs burned out. Jonathan pulled into the parking lot at 7:45. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and grabbed her backpack. "They have the good pancakes here," she said. "I know." "With the blueberries." "I remember." The bell above the door chimed when they walked in. The smell hit them first, coffee and bacon grease and something sweet baking in the back. Vinyl booths lined the windows. A long counter ran down one side, stools bolted to the floor, their red cushions cracked and patched with duct tape. The morning rush was just starting. A few regulars sat at the counter reading newspapers. A family with toddlers occupied one of the corner booths. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh white. Jonathan led Emma to a booth near the window. She climbed onto the seat and immediately reached for the basket of crayons in the center of the table. A paper placemat sat in front of her, printed with a connect-the-dots puzzle and a word search. She picked a red crayon and started drawing hearts in the margins. Their usual server wasn't working. The woman who approached their table was someone Jonathan had never seen before. Late 30s, tired eyes, hair pulled back in a ponytail that had started to come loose. She moved with the kind of efficiency that came from years of doing the same thing over and over until your body knew the rhythm without thinking. "Morning," she said. Her voice was soft. "What can I get you?" Emma looked up from her drawing. "Blueberry pancakes, please, with extra syrup." The waitress smiled. It didn't quite reach her eyes. You got it, sweetheart. She pulled out a notepad. And for you. Just coffee, Jonathan said. Black. She wrote it down and turned to leave. Wait, Emma said. What's your name? The waitress paused, looked back at Emma with something that might have been surprise, like she wasn't used to being asked. Maya, she said. The name landed like a punch to Jonathan's chest. He didn't react, didn't move, just sat there while his pulse spiked and his throat went tight. Maya walked away. Emma went back to her drawing. Jonathan watched her go, watched the way she moved between tables, refilling coffee, taking orders, her whole body carrying the weight of someone who'd been working too hard for too long. She came back 3 minutes later with a coffee pot in one hand and a mug in the other, set the mug down in front of Jonathan, tilted the pot. That's when he saw it. The ring. Thin gold band. Small jade stone. On her right hand, third finger. Identical to the one sitting in his desk drawer, 17 years and 2,000 miles away from the person who gave it to him. Jonathan's brain stopped processing. The world narrowed to that ring, the jade catching the fluorescent light, the gold worn smooth at the edges from years of being worn. Maya poured. The coffee stream hit the mug. Steam rose. Jonathan's hand was still wrapped around the cup from when she'd set it down. His fingers went numb. The ceramic slipped. The mug fell. It hit the table edge and shattered. Coffee exploded across the laminate surface, splashing onto the floor, onto Maya's apron, onto the front of Jonathan's shirt. Maya stumbled backward. The coffee pot jerked in her hand. Hot liquid sloshed over the rim, but she caught it, steadied it, kept it from spilling. Her eyes met Jonathan's. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Her face went through a sequence Jonathan could read like words on a page. Confusion first, then recognition. Not of him, but of something. Then shock. She knew. She didn't know how, didn't know why, but she knew. Emma had jumped at the crash. Now she was staring at the mess, crayons forgotten. Daddy! Before Jonathan could respond, a man's voice cut across the diner. Maya! The owner came storming out from behind the counter. Mid-50s. Thinning hair slicked back with too much gel. He wore a cheap button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a tie that didn't quite match. He moved like someone used to being listened to in small rooms. His name tag said Richard. He stopped at their table and stared at the spill. Then at Maya. What the hell happened? Maya opened her mouth, closed it. Her hands were shaking. I'm sorry, Mr. Stokes. You spaced out again, didn't you? His voice was loud enough that every head in the diner turned. I told you yesterday, if you can't focus on basic service, maybe you should find work somewhere else. Maya's face flushed red. She set the coffee pot down on the table, grabbed a towel from her apron pocket, and knelt to start cleaning up the broken ceramic. I'm docking your pay for that cup, Richard said. And if you pull this again, you're done. You understand? Yes, Mr. Stokes. Jonathan's jaw locked. His hands curled into fists under the table. Emma tugged his sleeve. Daddy, she whispered, why is that man so mean? The question hung in the air. Maya kept cleaning, wouldn't look up, wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Richard stood there for another 5 seconds, making sure everyone had seen him establish control. Then he walked back to the counter. The diner returned to its background noise. Conversations resumed. Silverware clinked against plates. Maya finished picking up the shards of ceramic. She stood, holding the towel full of broken pieces, and finally looked at Jonathan. Her eyes were wet. I'm so sorry, she said. Jonathan wanted to say something. Wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault. Wanted to stand up and tell Richard Stokes exactly what kind of man treats people like that. But his throat wouldn't work. His voice was gone. All he could see was the ring on her hand. All he could think about was the last time he'd seen that ring. February 2008. Maya Chen's apartment. The radiator clanking in the corner. Her crying because another grant proposal had been rejected. Her saying the system would never see her as anything but a quota hire. Him holding her and promising that someday, when he wasn't invisible anymore, he'd marry her, and they'd build the lab she deserved. 6 weeks later, she was diagnosed. 4 months after that, she was dead. And now her ring was on the hand of a waitress being humiliated in a diner in Austin, Texas, and Jonathan had no idea how or why or what it meant. Maya turned and walked away, still holding the broken cup. Jonathan pulled out his wallet, found a $100 bill, left it on the table. "Come on," he said to Emma, "but I didn't get my pancakes. We'll get breakfast somewhere else." He took her hand and walked out. The bell chimed behind them. In the car, Emma buckled her seatbelt and looked at him. "Why are we leaving so fast?" Jonathan started the engine. His hands were still shaking. "I don't know." It was the first time in 6 years he'd lied to his daughter. Jonathan sat in his car outside Jefferson Elementary with both hands locked on the steering wheel. The engine was still running. The heater blew warm air that smelled like stale coffee. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and looked at him. "Are you okay?" Jonathan forced his grip to loosen. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." He turned to face her. 6 years old. Too smart for her own good. She was watching him the way she watched everything, like she could see straight through whatever story he tried to tell. "I promise," he said. "I'm okay." Emma studied his face for another 3 seconds. Then she leaned over and kissed his cheek. "Bye, Daddy." She grabbed her backpack and climbed out. Jonathan watched her run across the playground toward a cluster of kids playing on the swings. Her braids bounced. Her shoelaces were untied again. She didn't look back. Jonathan waited until she disappeared through the double doors. Then he pulled out his phone and typed into the search bar, "Maya Chen Austin." The results loaded. A LinkedIn profile for a Maya Chen who worked in tech. A Facebook page for someone who looked too young. An obituary from 2008 for a molecular biology graduate student at the University of Texas. He clicked the obituary. Read it for the 100th time in 17 years. Maya Chen, 23, died May 14, 2008, after a brief illness. Brief illness. Like that phrase could contain 4 months of watching someone brilliant and fierce waste away in a hospital bed, while the system she'd spent her life trying to fix failed her completely. Jonathan closed the browser, put the phone down, drove to Vertex. The morning passed in a blur. He sat through a conference call about FDA approval timelines for a Phase 2 trial. His VP of Regulatory Affairs walked through the submission schedule, flagged potential delays, outlined contingency plans. Jonathan heard maybe half of it. His mind kept drifting back. Not to the diner, not to the waitress wearing the ring. Further back, to a research lab at UT Austin in the winter of 2008. He'd been 19, an orphan with a chemistry degree from community college, and no family, no money, no prospects. The lab hired him to wash glassware for $9 an hour. He worked the night shift because the pay was 50 cents more, and because it meant he could sleep in his car in the parking garage without campus security hassling him too much. He showered at the gym. Ate ramen he cooked on a hot plate he kept hidden in his locker. Stayed invisible. Until Maya Chen noticed him. She was a second-year grad student, 21. Brilliant in a way that made other people uncomfortable because she didn't apologize for it. She'd been the first person in her family to go to college, first to get a graduate degree. She was working on molecular pathways in cancer cells, and the research was going nowhere because her advisor kept steering her toward safer, more fundable projects. Jonathan didn't know why she started talking to him. Maybe she saw something familiar in the way he moved through the lab, like he was trying not to take up space. Maybe she was just kind. She started leaving journal articles on his bench, invited him to sit in on lab meetings, let him crash on her couch when January turned brutal, and sleeping in the car became dangerous. They fell in love slowly. Then, all at once, February 2008, she'd just gotten another grant rejection. Jonathan found her in her apartment, crying on the floor with the rejection letter crumpled in her fist. She said the system would never see her as anything but a quota hire. Said she'd never get the funding or the respect she deserved. Jonathan held her, told her she was the most brilliant person he'd ever met, told her that someday he'd have power and money, and when he did, he'd build her the lab she deserved. She laughed through tears, took off her ring, the one her grandmother had given her, slipped it onto his finger. "When you're not invisible anymore," she said, "I'll marry you." He corrected her. "When I'm not invisible anymore, I'll marry you. We'll build the lab together." She smiled. "I'm holding you to that." 6 weeks later, she was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. 4 months after that, she was dead. The conference call ended. Jonathan blinked, looked around the room. Everyone was standing, packing up laptops, filing out. His VP of Regulatory Affairs lingered by the door. "Jonathan, you good?" "Fine," Jonathan said. "Send me the revised timeline." He went back to his office, closed the door, sat at his desk and opened the drawer. The ring sat in its wooden box, gold and jade, a promise he'd carried for 17 years. He didn't take it out, just looked at it. Built Vertex from nothing. Funded research the system ignored. Hired people the system made invisible. Became the person Maya never got to be. But he'd never stopped being the boy in the parking garage, never stopped feeling like the world might notice him and decide he didn't belong. Jonathan closed the drawer, went home. That night, he sat in his home office, with the ring in front of him on the desk. The lamp cast long shadows across the wood grain. Outside, Austin's downtown lights glittered in the dark. He heard bare feet on hardwood. Turned. Emma stood in the doorway wearing her pajamas, the ones with the cats on them. She was holding her copy of Charlotte's Web. "You're still awake," Jonathan said. "I couldn't sleep." She walked over and climbed into his lap without asking. Settled in like she belonged there. "What's that?" She was pointing at the ring. Jonathan picked it up, let her see it in his palm. It belonged to someone important. "Who?" "Someone who died a long time ago." Emma touched the jade stone with one finger. Gentle, careful. "Does it make you sad?" Jonathan's throat tightened. "Yes." "Why do you keep it?" "Because I made her a promise." Emma looked up at him. Her eyes were Catherine's eyes, dark and serious. "Did you keep it?" The question hit him like a fist. "I tried." Emma shifted in his lap, put her small arms around his neck and squeezed. "Maybe you should give it back," she said. "So it stops hurting." Jonathan held her, closed his eyes, felt something crack open in his chest that he'd been keeping sealed for 17 years. The logic was so simple, so childlike, so completely impossible, but also true. He couldn't give it back to Maya. Maya was gone. But there was someone wearing her ring, someone who knew her face, Someone who might know how the ring ended up on a waitress's hand in a diner 2 miles from where Maya died. Emma pulled back, kissed his forehead the way he always kissed hers. "Night, Daddy." "Night, kiddo." She slid off his lap and padded back toward her room, dragging Charlotte's web behind her. Jonathan sat alone in the office, stared at the ring. Tomorrow, he'd go back to the diner. Tomorrow, he'd find out who that waitress was and why she was wearing a dead woman's ring. Tomorrow, he'd start facing the ghost he'd been running from for half his life. Jonathan walked into Morton's diner at 7 in the morning. The breakfast rush hadn't started yet. A handful of regulars sat at the counter reading newspapers, nursing coffee that steamed in the cool air. Maya was working the early shift. He saw her before she saw him. She was pouring water at a corner table, her back to the door. The moment the bell chimed, her shoulders went rigid. She turned. Their eyes met. The water pitcher trembled in her hand. Jonathan chose a booth in her section. Sat down. Waited. Maya finished pouring water at the other table. Set the pitcher down on the counter. Her hands were shaking. She picked up a notepad and walked over slowly, like someone approaching something that might bite. "Coffee?" Her voice was barely audible. "Please." She wrote it down. Didn't leave. Jonathan spoke before she could. "Is your last name Chen?" The notepad slipped from her fingers, clattered to the floor. Maya stared at him. "How did you— Is it?" She nodded, bent down to pick up the notepad. Straightened. "Yes." "Did you have an older sister?" Maya's face went white. The color drained so fast, Jonathan thought she might pass out. She didn't answer, just stood there, gripping the notepad with both hands. "Please," Jonathan said. "I need to know." Maya looked around the diner. The regulars weren't paying attention. The cook was in the back. Richard's office door was closed. She sat down across from Jonathan without asking permission. "Her name was Maya, too," she whispered. "Maya Chen. She died 17 years ago." Jonathan's throat closed. "How old were you?" 14. Maya's eyes were wet. She was in graduate school, molecular biology, at UT Austin. The pieces clicked into place. 14. That would make her 31 now. Young enough to be unrecognizable from the kid she'd been. Old enough to carry 17 years of weight on her face. "She showed me a picture once," Maya said. The words tumbled out like she'd been holding them for years. "Told me about this boy she met, Jonathan. She said he was brilliant. Said he washed lab equipment and slept in his car. But he was going to change the world someday." Jonathan couldn't breathe. She said she was going to marry him. The silence between them was so heavy, it felt like the air had turned to stone. Maya reached up and touched the ring on her right hand. "My grandmother gave us matching rings, one for each granddaughter. My sister gave me hers right before she went into the hospital the last time." Her voice cracked. She said, if I ever met Jonathan, I should show him this. She said he'd have the other one. Jonathan reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the wooden box. He placed it on the table between them, opened it. The gold band caught the fluorescent light. The jade stone gleamed. Maya stared at it. Then she looked at Jonathan, then back at the ring. She started crying. Not loud, not dramatic. Just tears running down her face while she covered her mouth with one hand. "You're him," she whispered. "You're Jonathan." He nodded. "She died thinking you'd forgotten about her." The words hit him like a fist to the chest. "I didn't forget. I never forgot." "Then why didn't you—" "Maya!" Richard Stokes's voice cut across the diner like a whip crack. He was standing by the counter, hands on his hips, face red. "What the hell are you doing sitting with a customer?" Maya stood up so fast she almost knocked the table over. "I'm sorry, Mr. Stokes. I was just—" "I don't care what you were just." Richard walked over, each step deliberate. He stopped next to the booth and looked down at Jonathan. "Sir, I apologize for my employee. She's new to customer service." "She's been here 3 years," Jonathan said quietly. Richard's smile tightened. "Well, still learning, apparently." He turned to Maya. "Get back to work. Now." Maya grabbed her notepad, started to walk away. Jonathan stood up. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Is there a problem, sir?" "Yes. You're treating her like—" Maya's hand closed around Jonathan's wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Please don't," she whispered. "I need this job." Jonathan looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes. The same fear he'd carried for years when he was invisible. When one wrong word could mean sleeping in his car through winter. When powerlessness was the only certainty. He sat back down. Richard smiled. It was the smile of a man who'd just won something. "Thank you for your understanding, sir. Maya, I expect you to remember where you work and who you work for. Customers don't pay to watch you chat." "Yes, Mr. Stokes." Richard walked back to his office. The door closed behind him. Maya stood by the booth, notepad in hand, tears still wet on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," Jonathan said. "Don't." Her voice was tight. "Don't apologize. Just, I can't lose this job. My daughter—" She stopped, looked away. "I'll get your coffee." She walked to the counter, came back with a pot and a mug, poured with shaking hands. Jonathan pulled out his wallet, found $200 bills, placed them on the table. "I need to know more," he said. "About your sister. About you. Please." Maya looked at the money, then at him. "I work the early shift all week, 7 to 2. I'll come back." She nodded, picked up one of the bills, left the other. "This is too much. It's not enough." Maya put the bill in her apron pocket, walked away without looking back. Jonathan sat there for another minute, stared at the ring sitting on the table between his empty coffee cup and Maya's abandoned notepad. 17 years. Maya Chen's little sister had been carrying her ring for 17 years, working minimum wage, raising a daughter alone, living the life her brilliant sister was supposed to escape. And Jonathan had built an empire while she stayed invisible. He closed the wooden box, put it back in his pocket, stood up. Maya was at the counter, pouring coffee for a regular. She glanced at him as he walked toward the door. Their eyes met. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Jonathan pushed through the door. The bell chimed. The morning air was cold. He got in his car and sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. He'd found her, Maya Chen's sister, the keeper of the ring, the girl who remembered. And now he had to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do with that. Jonathan returned to Morton's diner the next morning, and the morning after that. By the end of the week, he'd been there 5 times. He and Maya talked in stolen moments. 3 minutes while she refilled his coffee. 5 minutes during her smoke break behind the building. 2 minutes while she cleared tables near his booth. Never long enough. Always interrupted. Tuesday morning, she told him about the medical bills, how her sister's leukemia treatment bankrupted the family, how their parents sold the house, moved into a 1-bedroom apartment, and still couldn't cover what insurance wouldn't pay. "I was in my first year of nursing school," Maya said. She was wiping down the table next to his, speaking quietly enough that no one else could hear. "I dropped out to help take care of my grandmother. Worked at a grocery store, then a call center, then here." Jonathan watched her hands move in circles across the laminate. "You never went back?" To school? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what money? Wednesday, she told him about her daughter. 12 years old. Zoe. Smart kid. Loved science. Wanted to be a doctor someday. Her father? Jonathan asked. Maya's face closed. Not in the picture. Thursday, she asked about him, about the lab, about her sister. Jonathan told her fragments, the glassware he washed, the car he slept in, the way her sister left journal articles on his bench like breadcrumbs leading him somewhere he couldn't see yet. He told her about the promise, about the ring, about the night her sister cried because the system would never see her as anything but a quota hire. He didn't tell her about Vertex, didn't tell her about the $3 billion in assets, or the research programs, or the fortune he'd built from rage and grief. Every time he thought about saying it, the words stuck in his throat. How do you tell someone you became everything you promised to be while they stayed invisible? Friday morning, Richard Stokes was waiting by the counter when Jonathan walked in. "You're becoming a regular," Richard said. His smile was all teeth. "We appreciate loyal customers." Jonathan nodded, moved toward his usual booth. "Breakfast meeting?" Richard asked. "Or just enjoy the coffee?" "The coffee's fine." "Maya does a good job, doesn't she?" Richard's eyes were sharp. "Reliable, punctual. Knows her place." The last two words hung in the air like a threat. Jonathan sat down. Richard watched him for another 5 seconds, then walked back to his office. Maya appeared with the coffee pot. Her hands were shaking. "He knows," she whispered. "Knows what?" "That you keep coming back, that we keep talking." She poured coffee, eyes on the cup. "He's been watching." "Has he said anything?" "Not yet." She set the pot down. "But he will." She was right. That afternoon, Richard announced he was cutting Maya's hours, from 40 a week to 20. Effective immediately. Maya stood by the counter, still holding a tray of dirty dishes, and didn't say a word. "Performance issues," Richard said loudly, making sure the other staff heard. "Nothing personal, just business." He walked back to his office. The door closed. Maya set the tray down, went to the bathroom, didn't come out for 10 minutes. Jonathan drove to Vertex but couldn't focus. Sat through meetings without hearing a word. Signed off on budget approvals without reading the numbers. That night, Emma asked why they kept going back to the same diner. They were in his apartment. She was on the couch with her book. He was making dinner, burning pasta because he couldn't remember if he'd added salt. "I like their pancakes," Jonathan said. "We haven't had pancakes all week. You just get coffee." She was right. He'd been going alone, early, before picking her up for school. "I knew someone there a long time ago." Emma looked up from Charlotte's Web. "The waitress?" "Her sister." "Where's her sister now?" "She died." Emma closed her book, came into the kitchen, stood next to him while he drained the pasta in the sink, steam rising between them. "Was she important?" "Yes." "More important than Mommy?" The question hit him like a punch. Jonathan turned off the water, set the pot down, looked at his daughter. Emma's eyes were Catherine's eyes. Dark, serious, too old for 6. "Different," he said finally. "Different how?" He didn't have an answer that a 6-year-old would understand. Didn't have an answer that made sense even to him. Catherine had been his wife, Emma's mother. Someone he'd loved in the careful, measured way you love someone when you've already given your heart away, once, and watched it die. Maya Chen had been the first person who ever saw him. The only person who ever made him believe he could be more than invisible. "I loved your mom," Jonathan said. "Very much." "But?" "No buts." He knelt down so they were eye level. "Your mom was important. This person was important differently. Both things are true. Emma studied his face. Does it make you sad? Sometimes. She hugged him, tight, her small arms around his neck, her face pressed against his shoulder. You should stop going to that diner if it makes you sad. I can't. Why not? Because I made a promise. Because I'm 17 years too late. Because I built everything on top of a grave. And now I can't remember if I built it for her or for me. Because I'm not finished yet, Jonathan said. Emma pulled back. Finished with what? He didn't answer. They ate burned pasta in silence. Emma went to bed. Jonathan sat in his office with the ring on the desk in front of him. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He almost deleted it. Then he saw the message. Richard cut my hours in half. Said it was performance issues. I think it's because of you. Please stop coming to the diner. I can't lose this job. No signature. But he knew who it was from. Jonathan stared at the text. Read it 3 times. Please stop coming. She was asking him to walk away, to go back to his life and his company and his carefully controlled world where the past stayed buried and ghosts didn't wear rings at breakfast diners. He could do that. He should do that. But he'd spent 17 years running from the promise he couldn't keep. And now the universe had handed him someone who remembered, someone who knew, someone who was living the exact life her sister was supposed to escape. And he couldn't walk away. Not again. Jonathan typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, he wrote, I'm sorry. I'll fix this. He hit send before he could change his mind. The phone stayed silent. No response. Jonathan put it down, looked at the ring. He'd made Maya Chen a promise 17 years ago. He'd kept half of it, built the company, funded the research, made the invisible scene. But he'd left her sister behind. And now Richard Stokes was making Maya pay for Jonathan's guilt. Saturday morning. The breakfast rush was in full swing when Jonathan and Emma walked into Morton's diner. Every table was full. The line at the counter stretched to the door. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee hung heavy in the air. Maya was working the floor, alone. Jonathan saw her the moment they stepped inside. She was moving between tables with a coffee pot in one hand, a notepad in the other. Her uniform was wrinkled. Her hair was falling out of its ponytail. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She'd been here since 6. Double shift. No breaks. Emma tugged Jonathan's hand. There's a table by the window. They sat. Emma pulled out her crayons and started drawing on the placemat. Jonathan watched Maya take orders, refill drinks, clear plates. She moved like someone running on fumes. Richard Stokes stood by the register, arms crossed, watching her with a smirk that made Jonathan's jaw tighten. Maya came to their table, set down 2 menus, didn't meet Jonathan's eyes. Coffee? Her voice was barely audible. Please, and blueberry pancakes for Emma. Maya wrote it down, started to walk away. Are you okay? Jonathan asked quietly. She stopped, looked back at him. I'm fine. She wasn't fine, but she walked away before he could say anything else. A man at the corner booth raised his hand. Maya hurried over, coffee pot ready. She poured. The man looked at his plate and frowned. These eggs are undercooked. Maya leaned over to look. I can have the kitchen. I said they're undercooked. Are you listening? Yes, sir. I'll get you new ones right away. She picked up the plate, turned toward the kitchen. Richard's voice cut across the diner like a knife. Maya! She froze. Richard was walking toward her, each step deliberate. His face was red. Every conversation in the diner stopped. What's the problem now? He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. The customer's eggs need to be recooked. It's not a big... Not a big deal? Richard's voice rose. You served undercooked food to a customer, and you're telling me it's not a big deal? I didn't cook them, Mr. Stokes. You just what? You just served them without checking? You just don't care about quality? He was performing now, making sure every person in the room saw who had power. How many complaints have I gotten about you this week? 3? 4? 2. And they were both... Don't interrupt me. Richard stepped closer. I've been more than patient with you. Too patient. But clearly you're not capable of handling basic customer service. Maya's hands were shaking. The plate rattled. I need this job, Mr. Stokes. Please. You should have thought about that before you decided competence was optional. Emma had stopped drawing. She was watching, crayon frozen in her hand. Jonathan's fingers curled around the edge of the table. You're fired, Richard said. The words hung in the air. Maya didn't move, didn't speak. Did you hear me? You're fired. Effective immediately. Richard held out his hand. Give me your apron. Maya set the plate down on the nearest table. Her hands went to the ties at her back. She fumbled with the knot, fingers trembling so hard she couldn't get it loose. 40 people watching. She finally got the apron off, folded it, set it on the counter. Clean out your locker and leave, Richard said. I'll mail you your last check. Maya nodded, started walking toward the door. She passed Jonathan's table and stopped. She looked down at him, not with anger, not with blame, with something worse. Clarity. She told me about you, Maya said quietly. Jonathan's throat closed. My sister, in the hospital, right before she died. Maya's voice was steady, empty. She said you promised to marry her. She said when you weren't invisible anymore, you'd come find her, and you'd build the lab together. Emma was staring at her father. She died believing you would have kept it. Maya looked at the ring on her hand, then back at Jonathan. I guess she was wrong. She walked out. The bell above the door chimed. The diner was silent. 40 pairs of eyes on Jonathan. Richard stood by the counter, arms crossed, that same smirk on his face. He'd won. He knew it. Emma tugged Jonathan's sleeve. Daddy. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Daddy, you have to do something. The words cut through everything. Jonathan looked at his daughter, 6 years old, dark eyes, too smart, too good. She was right. He'd spent 17 years building a company on top of a grave. 17 years becoming someone who mattered, someone with power, someone who could fix things. And he'd sat here for 2 weeks watching Maya get torn apart because he was too afraid to face what he'd left behind. He'd made a promise to Maya Chen. When I'm not invisible anymore, I'll marry you. We'll build something that matters. Maya Chen was dead, but her sister was walking out of a diner with nothing, and Jonathan was sitting in a booth with everything, and the promise wasn't finished. Richard turned and headed back toward the kitchen, victory complete. Jonathan stood up, took Emma's hand. Come on. Where are we going? To do something. They walked out into the parking lot. The sun was bright. The air was warm. Maya was sitting in her car 3 spaces down. Her head was on the steering wheel. Her shoulders were shaking. Jonathan walked over, tapped on the window. She didn't look up. He tapped again. Maya lifted her head. Her face was wet. She stared at him through the glass for 5 long seconds. Then she rolled down the window. Jonathan reached into his pocket, pulled out the wooden box, opened it. He placed the ring in her palm. Gold and jade. 17 years of ghosts. I need to tell you something, he said. And for the first time since he'd walked into that diner and seen her wearing her sister's ring, Jonathan Pryce stopped running. Maya sat in her car with her head on the steering wheel. Her shoulders shook. Jonathan stood 3 feet from her window. Emma's hand was small and warm in his. He tapped on the glass. Maya didn't move. He tapped again. She lifted her head, turned. Her face was wet, eyes red. She stared at him through the window for a long moment. Then she rolled it down. Jonathan reached into his pocket, pulled out the wooden box, opened it. The ring sat in his palm. Gold and jade. 17 years of weight. He placed it in Maya's hand. She looked down at it, then at the ring on her finger, then back at Jonathan. "Your sister gave me this," he said quietly. February 2008. In her apartment. She'd just gotten another grant rejection. Maya's fingers closed around the ring. She was crying. Said the system would never see her as anything but a quota hire. Said she'd never get the funding she deserved. Jonathan's voice was steady, low, each word deliberate. I told her that was wrong. Told her she was the most brilliant person I'd ever met. Emma stood beside him, silent. She took off her ring, put it on my finger. Said when I wasn't invisible anymore, she'd marry me. Jonathan paused. I corrected her. I said when I'm not invisible anymore, I'll marry you. We'll build the lab you deserve together. I promise. Maya's breath caught. 6 weeks later, she was diagnosed with leukemia. The words came out flat, factual, like reading from a report. Acute myeloid, aggressive. The hospital couldn't afford the experimental treatment that might have saved her. I had no money, no power, no way to help. A bird landed on the car next to them, flew away. I watched her die over 4 months. May 14th, 2008. Austin Regional Hospital. Room 412. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I made a vow at her grave. I'd build the company she deserved to lead. I'd fund the research the system ignored. I'd make sure no one else stayed invisible the way we were. Maya was crying again. Quiet, tears running down her face. I kept the ring, carried it for 17 years. Jonathan looked at the matching ring on Maya's finger. I didn't know there was another one. Didn't know your grandmother gave you both rings. Didn't know you existed until I walked into that diner 2 weeks ago. She showed me your picture once, Maya whispered. Told me about the boy who washed glassware and slept in his car. Said you were going to change the world together. I tried. Did you? Maya looked up at him. Did you keep the promise? Jonathan didn't understand the question. I built Vertex. I fund rare disease research. She made me promise something, Maya said. In the hospital, her last week, she could barely talk. Maya's voice broke. She made me swear that if I ever met you, I'd tell you something. Jonathan waited. Maya closed her eyes, recited it like she'd memorized every word. The promise wasn't about me. It was about you. Build the lab. Fund the research. Don't let anyone else be invisible. She opened her eyes. Did you? The question hit him like a fist. Did you keep it? Maya asked again. Did you build the lab? Fund the research? You don't know who I am. You're Jonathan, the boy my sister loved. I'm the CEO of Vertex Pharmaceuticals. The words felt strange in his mouth, like speaking a language he'd forgotten. $3 billion in assets. We fund rare disease research, treatments the system ignores. We hire people from non-traditional backgrounds, people the system makes invisible. Maya's face went through shock, disbelief, recognition. Then something else, something harder. You did it, she said. You kept the promise. Yes. Then why are you here? Her voice rose. Why have you been coming to that diner for 2 weeks? Why have you been watching me get humiliated and done nothing? The accusation landed. True. Undeniable. Why didn't you help me? Maya's hands were shaking. You have billions. You have power. You could have said something, done something, anything. Her voice cracked. Instead, you just sat there, watching, like I was invisible. Jonathan had no answer. My sister died believing you'd keep your promise. She was right. You did. Maya looked at the ring in her palm. But she also died believing you were a good person. Someone who saw people. Someone who cared. The words cut deeper than any knife. Was she wrong about that too? Jonathan opened his mouth. Closed it. What could he say? That he was paralyzed by guilt? That he didn't know how to face the sister of the woman he'd failed to save? That he'd spent 17 years running from the boy he used to be? All of it was true. None of it mattered. He'd watched Maya get torn apart for 2 weeks because confronting his past was harder than letting her suffer. The car door behind them opened. Emma stepped out, walked over. She looked up at Maya with those dark, serious eyes. My daddy keeps his promises, Emma said. Her voice was small, but clear. He just forgets sometimes. Maya stared at her. He kept the ring for 17 years. That's longer than I've been alive. Emma reached up and took her father's hand. He built the company. He helps sick people. He does everything your sister wanted. Jonathan looked down at his daughter. 6 years old. Too smart. Too good. But sometimes he gets scared, Emma said. And when he's scared, he forgets he's not invisible anymore. The silence that followed was total. Maya looked at Emma, then at Jonathan, then at the 2 rings, one in her palm, one on her finger. I'm sorry, Jonathan said. His voice was barely audible. I should have helped you. I was afraid. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. Maya didn't respond. But Emma's right. I'm not invisible anymore. Jonathan's voice steadied, deepened. And neither are you. Not if I can help it. What does that mean? It means I'm going to fix this. Jonathan looked back at the diner. Through the windows, he could see Richard Stokes at the register, counting money. Your sister made me promise to build the lab and fund the research, to make sure no one else stays invisible. He turned back to Maya. I kept half that promise. Time to keep the rest. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. The diner was empty except for staff prepping for the lunch shift. Jonathan walked through the front door. The bell chimed. A cook looked up from the grill, surprised to see a customer this early. We're not open yet, he called. I'm here to see Richard Stokes. The cook pointed toward the back. Office. Jonathan walked past empty booths, past the counter where Maya had worked for 3 years. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The smell of coffee and cleaning solution hung in the air. Richard's office was a cramped room behind the kitchen. The door was open. Richard sat at a metal desk covered in invoices and time cards, reading glasses perched on his nose. Jonathan knocked on the doorframe. Richard looked up. Recognition flashed across his face. The customer who'd been coming in all week. The one who left massive tips. The one who paid too much attention to Maya. We're closed, Richard said. Opens at 11. I'm not here for breakfast. Jonathan stepped inside. I'm here to talk business. Richard leaned back in his chair, smiled. Business? My name is Jonathan Price. I am the CEO of Vertex Pharmaceuticals. The smile widened. Richard stood up, extended his hand. Mr. Price, Richard Stokes, please, sit down. Jonathan shook his hand. sat in the plastic chair across from the desk. Vertex Pharmaceuticals, Richard said. That's the biotech company, right? Down on 6th Street? Yes? I've heard good things. Richard's tone shifted, obsequious, grasping, the voice of a man who sensed opportunity. What can I do for you? Looking to set up a corporate catering account? We do great breakfast spreads, very reasonable rates. I want to buy the diner. Richard blinked. I'm sorry? This building, the business, everything. I want to buy it. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale. Jonathan pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket, set it on the desk. That's the property appraisal. Based on comparable sales in the area, the building and business are worth approximately $400,000. Richard picked up the paper, scanned it. I'm offering $1.2 million, Jonathan said. All cash, no contingencies. Close in 48 hours. The paper trembled in Richard's hand. That's triple the value. Yes. Why? Because I want it done fast. Richard set the paper down. His eyes narrowed. This is about Maya, isn't it? This is about me wanting to buy your diner. I fired her on Saturday. You were there. Richard's smile turned ugly. So what? You're going to swoop in and rescue her? Play the hero? Jonathan's voice didn't change. Calm, flat. I'm offering you $1.2 million for a struggling business. You can take it or leave it. Richard studied him, calculating, suspicious. But the number was too big to ignore. I'd need to see proof of funds. My lawyer will send verification within the hour. And the terms? 48-hour close, all cash. You walk away clean. Jonathan stood. I'll have the paperwork drawn up today. Think about it. He turned to leave. Mr. Price? Jonathan stopped. Why would you pay 3 times what this place is worth? Jonathan looked back at Richard Stokes, saw the insecurity beneath the bluster, the small man who needed to control people because he couldn't control anything else. Because it's worth it to me. He walked out. 48 hours later, the diner was his. Wednesday afternoon. The lunch rush was ending. Jonathan walked in with Maya beside him. She'd been quiet since he'd called her that morning. Told her to meet him here. Told her to trust him. The staff was clearing tables. 3 servers, 2 cooks, 1 dishwasher. They looked up when Jonathan and Maya entered. Can everyone come to the front, please? Jonathan said. The staff exchanged glances. Slowly, they gathered near the counter. Richard emerged from the back office. Saw Jonathan. His face went tight. What's going on? One of the servers asked. Jonathan stood in the center of the dining room. Maya stood slightly behind him, arms crossed, uncertain. As of 10 o'clock this morning, I'm the legal owner of Morton's Diner, Jonathan said. The staff went silent. Richard stepped forward. That's right. I sold the business. But don't worry. Nothing's changing. You'll all keep your jobs. Actually, Jonathan said, everything's changing. He turned to face the staff directly. Effective immediately. This diner is employee-owned. Shares will be distributed equally among everyone who's worked here for more than a year. Jonathan pulled a folder from his bag, set it on the counter. That's the paperwork. You'll each own a percentage of the business. Maya will be managing partner. Nobody moved. What? One of the cooks said. Employee-owned. You work here, you own part of it. Decisions are made collectively. Profits are shared. That's not legal, Richard snapped. I sold you the business. You can't just give it away. I can do whatever I want with it. It's mine. Richard's face went red. This is fraud. I'll sue. I'll have the sale reversed. Jonathan reached into his bag again, pulled out a cashier's check, handed it to Richard. $1.2 million. As agreed. The sale is final. Richard stared at the check. His hands shook. You're done here, Jonathan said quietly. The words landed like a hammer. Richard looked around the room, at the staff watching him, at Maya standing with her arms still crossed, eyes wet. He took the check, walked to the back office, grabbed his coat, walked out without another word. The bell chimed as the door closed behind him. The silence that followed was complete. Jonathan turned back to the staff. I know this is a lot to process. Maya can walk you through the details. But the short version is, this is your diner now. You decide how it runs. One of the servers raised her hand. Why? Because someone I cared about believed people shouldn't be invisible. Jonathan looked at Maya. And I made her a promise. He walked to the center of the room, spoke to Maya directly now, but loud enough for everyone to hear. 17 years ago, your sister and I made a promise to each other. I told her when I wasn't invisible anymore, I'd marry her, and we'd build something that mattered. His voice was steady, low, each word deliberate. She's gone, but the promise isn't. Maya's breath hitched. I can't marry her, but I can honor what that promise meant. Jonathan pulled a second folder from his bag, handed it to Maya. That's a partnership agreement. Co-director of a new foundation. Vertex is funding it. Full salary, full benefits. Your job is to find people the system makes invisible and give them a path forward. Training programs, research positions, scholarships, whatever they need. Maya opened the folder, stared at the papers inside. Not as an employee, Jonathan said. As an equal. As the person who builds the thing your sister should have built. The tears were running down Maya's face now. I don't understand, she whispered. Your sister told you to give me a message. She said the promise was about building the lab and funding the research, about making sure no one stays invisible. Jonathan's voice softened. She was right. That's what I did. But I stopped halfway. He gestured around the diner, at the staff, at Maya. This is the other half. Your sister didn't just want me to build the company. She wanted me to remember what it felt like to be invisible, to make sure I never let it happen to anyone else. Maya looked down at the ring on her finger. Gold and jade. If you'll let me, Jonathan said, we'll build it together. The way she wanted. The silence stretched. Then Maya looked up, looked at Jonathan, looked at the folder in her hands. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She'd say yes. 3 months later, Maya's place opened its doors on a Saturday morning. The old Morton's Diner sign was gone. In its place, clean white letters on dark wood. The interior had been gutted and rebuilt. New booths, new counter, bright paint, windows that let in actual sunlight. But it still smelled like coffee and bacon. Still had paper placemats for kids to draw on. Emma sat in the front row of the community room in the back, a notebook open on her lap. 12 other children filled the space around her, ages 6 to 14. All of them watching Maya Chen stand at the front with a tray of household items. Who knows what happens when you mix baking soda and vinegar? Maya asked. Hands shot up. A girl in the second row called out without waiting. It bubbles. Right. But why? Maya poured white vinegar into a beaker, added a spoonful of baking soda. The mixture foamed and hissed. That's a chemical reaction. The acid in the vinegar breaks down the base in the baking soda. They can't exist in the same space, so they create something new. Carbon dioxide gas. Emma was writing it all down. Every word. Maya's daughter Zoe stood beside her mother, holding up a poster board with drawings of molecules. She was 12, quiet, smart. She'd helped her mom prepare the lesson the night before. Science isn't just in labs, Maya said. It's everywhere. In your kitchen, in your body, in the way the world works. She looked at the kids. And you don't need to be rich or special to understand it. You just need to pay attention. Jonathan watched from the doorway. He'd arrived 10 minutes ago, parked his car outside, and stood there listening. Maya saw him, smiled, kept teaching. Across town, Richard Stokes was posting his 7th Facebook rant in 2 weeks. Local billionaire Jonathan Price bought Morton's Diner 3 months ago, the post read. Claims it's about giving back. Really? Or is this about impressing a young waitress 30 years younger than him? Ask yourself why a CEO spends millions on a failing diner instead of helping real charities. Optics, ego, nothing more. The post had 43 comments. Some agreed. Some called Richard bitter. Most didn't care. Jonathan's PR team had sent him the link that morning, recommended a response, a statement, anything. Jonathan deleted the email. He didn't care what Richard Stokes said. Richard was shouting into the void, trying to matter, trying to be seen. Let him shout. Jonathan had work to do. The Maya Chen Foundation launched the same week the diner reopened. Quietly. No press release, no ribbon cutting. Just 12 people hired from backgrounds the system ignored. A 22-year-old who'd aged out of foster care and been living in his car. Hired as a lab technician. A 19-year-old former dishwasher with a GED and no references. Enrolled in a chemistry program with full tuition covered. A 35-year-old single mother who'd spent a decade waiting tables. Brought on as operations coordinator. People who'd been invisible. Given a path forward. Maya ran the foundation with the same precision she'd once used to balance trays and memorize orders. Jonathan provided the funding and stayed out of her way. They met twice a week, reviewed applications, made decisions, built something neither of them could have built alone. One Saturday morning, after Maya's class ended and the kids had filed out, Jonathan asked Emma if she wanted to take a drive. "Where?" she asked. "Somewhere I need to go." They drove to Oakwood Cemetery on the east side of Austin. The sky was clear. The air was warm. Trees lined the paths between rows of headstones. Jonathan parked near the older section, took Emma's hand. They walked together through the grass. Catherine Price was buried beneath an oak tree, Emma's mother, Jonathan's late wife. The headstone was simple. Her name, her dates. No flourishes. Jonathan and Emma stood there for a moment, silent. "Hi, Mommy," Emma whispered. Jonathan knelt down, touched the stone. "I'm sorry I don't visit more." Emma squeezed his hand. "It's okay. She knows you're busy." They stayed for 5 minutes. Then Jonathan stood, and they walked 3 rows over. Maya Chen's grave was smaller, simpler. Just a flat marker in the ground. Maya Chen, 1985 to 2008. Beloved daughter and sister. Jonathan knelt again, pulled 2 rings from his pocket. Gold and jade. Identical twins separated for 17 years. He placed them side by side on the stone. They caught the sunlight, gleamed. Emma stood beside him, watching. "Who is she?" Emma asked quietly. "Someone who saw me when I was invisible." "Like Maya at the diner?" "Her sister." Emma thought about that. "Is that why you helped Maya?" "Part of it." "What's the other part?" Jonathan looked at the rings. "I made a promise, a long time ago. I told her when I wasn't invisible anymore, I'd marry her. We'd build something that mattered." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question that mattered most. "Did you keep your promise, Daddy?" Jonathan looked back across the cemetery. past the trees, past the roads, to the skyline where Vertex Pharmaceuticals stood, to the diner 3 miles west where kids were learning science from a waitress who'd been made invisible, to the foundation lab where 12 people were getting a second chance. Maya's sister had died believing he'd keep the promise, and for 17 years he thought he had. Built the company, funded the research, made the invisible scene, but he'd stopped halfway. Built the empire, forgot the people, until her sister walked into a diner wearing a ghost's ring and reminded him what the promise really meant. "I'm keeping it now," Jonathan said. Emma hugged him. Good. They stayed at the grave for another 10 minutes. Then they drove back across town. That afternoon, Jonathan and Maya co-taught the Foundation's first research seminar. 12 students in a converted lab space, former dishwashers and waitresses and kids who'd aged out of the system. Jonathan talked about molecular pathways. Maya talked about navigating a system that didn't want you. Emma and Zoe sat in the back, taking notes. 2 daughters watching their parents build something from grief. Outside, the sun moved across the sky. The diner served breakfast to families. The Foundation students asked questions and learned, and started to believe they could be more than invisible. And in Oakwood Cemetery, 2 rings sat side by side on a headstone, catching the afternoon light. A promise made in poverty, kept in power. Not a marriage of 2 people, a marriage of past and future, of loss and purpose, of a boy who'd been invisible and a girl who'd seen him, and 17 years of trying to become worthy of what she'd believed he could be. The invisible made seen, the forgotten made whole, a promise kept, finally, completely, the way it should have been all along.